My name is Davi Cutner, and I have the distinct privilege and honor to be the president of this amazing Kehillah. Along with our esteemed Rabbi Adam Starr and the dedicated members of the Board of Directors, we thank you for joining us here tonight. For those of you for whom this is the first visit with us, I want to take a brief moment to tell you a little bit more about our dynamic and growing community. The doors of the Young Israel of Toco Hills are always open to warmly welcome anyone and everyone who would like to explore the richness and meaningful spirituality associated with modern Orthodoxy. We also recognize the important value of partnering and participating with the broader Atlanta Jewish community in the spirit of Klal Yisrael. We foster an approach to religious Zionism and celebrate such holidays as Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim. Our continued desire to incorporate Israel's interests, culture, and vision is a cornerstone of our community. In addition, we are the very first Orthodox shul in the world to be built from the ground up according to environmentally sustainable standards. As you would probably guess, it takes a lot of time, talent, and financial resources to make fabulous events like tonight happen, and to continue to be a leading institution here in Atlanta. If you like what you see tonight, please join us for future programs. We will be hosting a fun Purim meal on Thursday evening, March 5th. Each year, we host a Yom HaAtzmaut festival with food and fun for the entire family. That will be Thursday, April 23rd, right here on our campus. More information can be found on your tickets or on our website. We can certainly use your help in making more wonderful events like this happen. Please consider contributions to our Adult Education Fund, our Israel Education Fund, our Youth Fund, or our Environmentally Sustainable Fund. Our contact information can be found on the back of your ticket. You can find us on the web at www.gif.org. You can like us on Facebook, and you can follow us on Twitter. This evening has been made possible by the generosity of Betty and Malcolm Mintz, a celebration of their 50th wedding anniversary. From the bottom of our hearts, we thank you and wish you many, many more years of health and happiness. In just a few minutes, we'll have the privilege to hear from one of the most thoughtful leaders of our generation. Rabbi Sachs, you have made quite a profound impact on our community. Many of us still have fond memories of your visit to our shul a number of years ago. Our shul davens from the Koren Siddur, and it has most certainly enhanced our communal tefillah experience. Thank you for all you do for the Jewish people. Rabbi Sachs has a full day tomorrow. Rabbi Sachs has a full day tomorrow and will need to leave at the conclusion of his talk. We ask for your respect to make this happen. Without further ado, I would like to call upon Rabbi Adam Starr for a few words of introduction about Rabbi Sachs. Thank you.
Wow. I never imagined this at 2074 La Vista. Shalom, Erev Tov. It's really such an incredible opportunity for us at Young Israel of Toco Hills to welcome such dear friends from across Atlanta's Jewish community to our new magnificent spiritual home. We are so blessed due to the extreme generosity of so many in our congregation to finally be in a position to host such an extraordinary gathering. You all, or this is my 7th year in Atlanta, you all, have come together this evening representing different communities, congregations and denominations across Atlanta, to hear words of wisdom and inspiration from a great Jewish leader of our time, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. Hinei ma tov u'ma shevet achim gam yachad. And I'd like to as well specifically thank Betty and Malcolm Mintz, who have made this evening possible in honor of your 50th wedding anniversary, celebrating with 650 of your closest and dearest friends. And may the two of you be blessed with many more good years together, with love, happiness, and good health, with continued nachas from your children and your grandchildren. Rabbi Sacks writes in his work, A Judaism Engaged with the World, and I quote, "The challenge of our time is to go out to Jews with a Judaism that relates to the world, their world, with intellectual integrity, ethical passion, and spiritual power. A Judaism neither intimidated by the world nor dismissive of it. A Judaism fully expressive of the broad horizons and high ideals of our heritage. We have much to teach the world, and the world has much to teach us," end quote. This idea, this teaching, inspires who we are and what we stand for at Young Israel. Our shul's Hebrew name is Kilat Or HaTorah, Congregation of the Light of Torah. That name, Or HaTorah, is symbolized by the flames behind me that decorate the doors of our Aron Kodesh. And if you look above the Aron, the windows form a menorah, which is the symbol of the vehicle from which the light of our Torah is spread out to illuminate throughout the world. This symbolizes and represents our congregation's deep commitment to Torah and tradition, while at the same time accepting our sincere responsibility to engage and bring light to the greater world around us. Rabbi of the UK for 22 years, Lord Jonathan Sacks serves as a beacon of light for Torah, teaching its wisdom and timeless message to illuminate our world, which, as we know, is too often filled with darkness. He is a global religious leader, philosopher, author, and moral voice for our time, who is described by the Prince of Wales as a light unto this nation. And Rabbi Sacks is the author of 25 books and has published commentaries to the Siddur, and has completed commentaries to the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur Machzorim that we proudly use in this shul. Our shul, Rabbi Sacks, is a walking advertisement for the Koren Sacks Siddur. And Rabbi Sacks this evening will be addressing a very relevant and difficult topic that we face in our times, and that is confronting violence in the name of God. It is my distinct privilege and honor to introduce to you the Honorable Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks.
If I may, I would wish to pay tribute not only to everyone who made this new building possible, all of you who gave in so many different ways, but may I pay tribute to Rabbi Star, who's been the shining star who's inspired you in this project. I love the idea of a shul that's environmentally friendly. There was an international conference at Copenhagen a few years ago, I don't know if you remember, on climate change. It's a true story. The government decided they wanted to take a religious message to Copenhagen. So the Secretary of State for the Environment asked us to gather together as religious leaders. And, do I have to stand still? Can you follow this?
I'm enjoying it.
What?
It's a challenge.
Oh, it's a challenge. Okay, here we go. Give it a try. So we all gave our little different Torah, Christian, Jain, Buddhist, Zoroastrian, a whole lot. And I said, friends, I have a very simple solution. Let's get the world to keep Shabbos. Work this out, no cars, no aeroplanes. We'd reduce our carbon footprint by a seventh. And all the religious leaders said, wow, that's amazing. And all the imams came up to me and said, you know what, Rabbi Sachs, we're going to tell our congregations not to drive to the mosque on Friday. I said, once you finish with your congregations, perhaps you could give that sermon out. So I love this environmentally friendly building, and may it be full of joy and simcha and Shekhinah, the divine presence. I also want to say what a mechayel it is to come back here to Atlanta. I was here 4.5 years ago, addressing the university, because we were doing a seminar with the Dalai Lama on happiness. He's a devoted guy, I have to tell you, the Dalai Lama. We spent a week together in Amritsar, in North India, the Jerusalem of the Sikhs. It's where the Golden Temple is. And he stood in front of 2,000 Sikhs in the Sikh university saying, I feel a deep sense of kinship with the Jewish people. He said, and he pointed to my yarmulke and said, if it weren't that I didn't have one of these, I think I might become Jewish. So somebody found a spare yarmulke. For that evening, the Dalai Lama wore his yarmulke all evening. But I have to say, the reason I said yes to the invitation was the subject of the seminar. You will never believe what this subject was. For a Jew, it was the most counter-cultural subject imaginable. It was a seminar on happiness. If they want me to do guilt, existential angst, identity crisis, we got gold medals in all of those things. But happiness, that's for Gentiles. You need to be. But you know what? I think we could do with a bit of happiness. I really do. And therefore, let me celebrate with you the couple who've made my visit here possible, to Betty and Malcolm Minsk, who've celebrated 50 years of happiness together. And friends, do me a favor, please, if this is a Jewish evening, we are going to sing a little Simon Tov and Mazel Tov to Betty and Malcolm. Simon Tov, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov, Simon Tov, Simon Tov, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov, Simon Tov, Simon Tov, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov, Simon Tov. Over and done with, friends. Now, I wish I could avoid it. I really do, but I have to speak about a serious topic. And I'm going to say some words tonight about violence in the name of God, but I'm going to preface them with some remarks about anti-Semitism, because this is becoming real and very challenging. I grew up in a very non-Jewish environment. Close friends, not Jews. And throughout my whole life, I never experienced one single incident of anti-Semitism. Not one. Until it came 2001, 2001 or 2, early 2002, and our youngest daughter, who was studying at the London School of Economics and had gone to a rally, an anti-globalization rally, which quickly turned into a tirade, first against America, then against Israel, and then against Jews. And this 19-year-old sat on my bed, tears streaming down her face, and said, "Dad, they hate us." And that was a very, very big wake-up call. And I started researching it. I read everything I could. And I came to the conclusion that we were about to go through, actually, a climate change. I remember the first day I spoke about it, February 28th, 2002. I addressed parliamentarians. I wrote an article in the national press. And for the next 3 years, I warned, this is coming. My congregation told me, many of them, it wasn't true, I was exaggerating, but I knew even then that I was understating, not overstating the case. And it was so serious that, and I share this with you, in May 2007, that's, nearly 8 years ago, I actually spoke, I went to see together the 3 leaders of Europe. Angela Merkel, who was chairing the EU. Sorry? Oh, you don't know how lucky you are, guys. I can hear me and I'm bored already. I will try and speak more clearly. Sorry, you're quite right. In 2007, I went to see Angela Merkel, head of the European Union, José Manuel Barroso, head of the European Commission, and Hans-Gert Pöttering, the president of the European Parliament in Strasbourg. I sat straight opposite the 3 of them and told them the Jews of Europe are beginning to ask, is there a place for Jews in Europe? And that should concern you, the leaders of Europe. So it's serious, and we have to stand and confront it, and first we have to understand it. But I think probably even before we do that, let's just not get too terribly serious, because for me, one of the great moments in anti-Semitism came when 2 Jews were sitting in a coffee house in Vienna in 1933, and one of them is reading the local Jewish newspaper, and the other one is reading the notoriously anti-Semitic newspaper, Der Stürmer, and the first says to the second, "Why are you reading that anti-Semitic garbage?" And the second one with a smile says, "Well, you're reading the Jewish newspaper, what does it tell you? Jews are assimilating, Jews are arguing, Jews are dividing, they're disappearing. When I read Der Stürmer, what do I hear? The Jews run the banks, the Jews control the economy, the Jews control the media. If you want the good news about the Jewish people, always read the anti-Semites." But the question is, what is anti-Semitism? And if you actually look at what people were saying in Europe in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, you will come up with a curious finding that people hated Jews because they were rich, and they hated Jews because they were poor. They hated them because they were capitalists. They hated them because they were communists. They hated them because they kept to themselves, and they hated them because they infiltrated everywhere. Voltaire hated Jews because he said they believe in an ancient and highly primitive, superstitious religious faith. Stalin hated Jews because he said they are rootless cosmopolitans who believe nothing. So anti-Semitism is a series of contradictions. How then are we to understand it? And the answer is, it is a virus. It is something that attacks the body politic, and somehow it is a social disease, not a doctrine. The body, of course, has a most incredibly sophisticated mechanism to detect and repel viruses. It is called the immune system. How then does a virus succeed in defeating the immune system which already recognizes the virus? And the answer is it does so by mutating. And that is the key thing to understand about anti-Semitism. It mutates, so that the new anti-Semitism is not the same as the old anti-Semitism. And if you look at the history of 2,000 years, you will see that it has mutated 3 times, and we are living through the 4th mutation. When did anti-Semitism begin? Well, I have to say, I mean, other than in Megillat Esther that we're going to read in just over in 3 weeks or so, but if you're looking outside the Bible, the first real anti-Semite is an Egyptian priest called Manetho, who lived under Ptolemy II in Egypt in the 3rd century BCE. And from Manetho, it moves to the Greek writers. Until then, they've been quite positive towards the Jews. Theophrastus, who was a Talmud of Aristotle, calls the Jews a nation of philosophers. But once Manetho has opened this door, you get first the Greek writers and then the Roman writers being quite hostile or critical towards Jews. However, I don't think that should be called anti-Semitism. I think that was xenophobia. You know what the mafia say when they are just about to shoot you and get you to sleep with the fishes? They say, nothing personal, strictly business. So when the Greeks and the Romans hated Jews, it was nothing personal. Because they hated anyone who wasn't a Greek or a Roman. They looked down on them. The Greeks called non-Greeks barbarians, because barbar is the sound of a sheep. They thought they were hardly even human. So the first mutation occurs with, sadly, the birth of Christianity. Because then it gets very up close and personal. It is directed not against foreigners in general, but against specifically Jews. Jews who did not recognize the Messiah, Jews who may even, so some of the Gospels said, were responsible for the death of the Messiah. That was the mutation. And from then on, anti-Semitism as such, or perhaps we'd call it Judeophobia, is born. It becomes serious in the 4th century with the Church Fathers. The Church Fathers discovered, believe it or not, that many Christians were going to shul. I mean, you know, they read that Jesus was Jewish, so let's go to shul. Maybe even then the Kiddush was better, I don't know. And that is when Gregory of Nyssa and the worst, John Chrysostom, start writing a literature known as the Adversus Judaeos literature, the anti-Jewish literature to stop Christians going to shul. And of course the trouble is what became an internal argument within the Christian church then was available to later generations to use for hostile purposes. So that was the first mutation. The second mutation we can date with some precision to 1095. It is then that Urban II announces the First Crusade, and in 1096, the Crusaders, on the way to liberate the Holy Land from the Moors, from the Muslims, stop, go out of their way to Northern Europe and massacre Jewish communities in Worms, in Speyer, in Cologne, in Mainz. And from that moment onwards, Jews are not just the people who rejected Christianity. They become a kind of dark, demonic, mysterious force that is somehow responsible for all the bad things that happen in the world. Jews are accused of desecrating the host, of, as it were, vandalizing sacred objects. They are accused of poisoning wells. They are accused of spreading the plague. They are accused of being responsible for the Black Death. And all of a sudden, very, very bad things start happening. Sadly, speaking as a loyal Englishman, I have to say that Britain or England is responsible for one of the worst charges of all, the charge known as the blood libel. In 1144, a young child, Christian child, is found dead in Norwich. Nobody says anything. 5 years later, somebody writes a book about him, saying that the Jews killed him to use his blood in making matzah for Pesach. An absolutely crazy story, because anyone who even knew anything about Jews knew you can't eat even a speck of blood. It's an entirely Christian myth. It only makes sense if you believe in what is called transubstantiation, that in the Eucharist you're drinking the blood and eating the flesh of Jesus. It only makes sense then. Transubstantiation, the word was coined just 50 years before the first blood. So you understand this is a Christian thing. It's got nothing to do with Jews, but the blood libel went on and on and on, and in some senses it still exists today. That second mutation that turned the Jew into some kind of demonic figure, children of the devil, the synagogue of Satan, led to 5 centuries of persecution, to which we owe, to which the English language owes these words. Just listen to these words, all of them created out of the way Jews were treated in Europe in the Middle Ages. Disputation, forced conversion, expulsion, inquisition, auto da fe, burning at the stake, ghetto, and pogrom. That is a litany of shame. All of those words were born out of mutation number 2. The Christian anti-Judaism, in effect, comes to an end in Western Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries. Because in the 16th and 17th centuries, Christians were busy killing one another throughout Europe in the great wars of religion, culminating in the 30 Years' War of 1618 to 1648, in which as many as a third of the population of Germany died in that war alone. And Europe comes out of this determined to take religion out of the equation. What in America you call separation of church and state, though they didn't do it that way in Europe. And instead, in the 18th and 19th century, first come the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the movement of thought called Enlightenment, and the opening up of civil rights to Jews called emancipation. It took a long time. Do you know which, were Jews ever banned from Senate or Congress? I don't think they were. But in Britain, you know that the City of London 4 times elected Lionel de Rothschild from 1847 to 1858. 4 times they elected him as their member of parliament, and he couldn't take his seat in the House because it involved a Christian oath. It was only in 1858 they finally let him enter the House without a Christian oath, and he then went on to be, for my money, the most unusual Jew in history, because for the rest of his long and distinguished parliamentary career, he didn't say a single word. The only silent Jew that there ever has been. So now, for the first time, Jews can be equal citizens of the secular nation state with full civil rights. And all sorts of wonderful things happen, you know. I mean, I see it in the House of Lords. Her Majesty was very kind to knight me in 2005, which was absolutely wonderful because my mother, she wasn't that interested in me getting a knighthood, but it got her to meet the Queen, you know. This is different. I have to tell you, when the Queen knights you, you have to kneel. And you all know that Jews will never kneel for anyone except Hashem alone. So they had to make a special, and this is absolutely true, they had to make a special thing like a stender, so that I could incline marginally from the top. And of course, when this happened, the Queen turned to Prince Philip and said, "Why is this night different from all other nights?" But sadly, when just this was happening, when it seemed as if a new day was dawning, along came the third mutation. And we can date it with some precision. It is in 1879 that a German journalist called Wilhelm Marr coins the word anti-Semitism. It didn't exist as a word before then. What was the difference? Until then, Jews had been hated for their religion. Now they were hated for their race. That is what anti-Semitism is. Hatred of Jews because of their race. It had surfaced a little briefly in 15th century Spain, but by and large was a new phenomenon. And of course, this new anti-Semitism is much more dangerous than the old, because Christians could work for the conversion of the Jews. You can change your religion, but you cannot change your race. So they couldn't work for the conversion of Jews. They had to work for the elimination of Jews. And that is what became the third mutation, in many ways the most serious of all. And the rest is history. From that, Theodor Herzl, from Vienna, which had a notoriously, scandalously anti-Semitic mayor called Karl Lueger, who became Hitler's role model. And then he is sent by his magazine to France, where in 1880 Louis Drumont published a book called La France Juive, accusing the Jews of running France. It became a bestseller and remained so until 1945. And then finally in 1894, 1895, he reports on the Dreyfus trial and hears on the streets of Paris, Mort aux Juifs, death to the Jews. Those same words were heard on the streets of Paris last summer, 120 years exactly after they were first heard. Now, we are living through the fourth mutation. And in many ways, it is the most ironic and unexpected of all, because we still stand, just 70 years, within living memory of the Holocaust. Don't forget that after the Holocaust, after it had really sunk in what actually had been done to the Jewish people at that time, of course, not only the Jewish people, the Roma, the Sinti, the homosexuals, the physically and mentally handicapped, but once it had sunk in, Europe decided on the most sophisticated effort ever to create an immune system so that never again. And they were very serious about it. 50 years of anti-racist legislation, 50 years of interfaith dialogue, 50 years of Holocaust. I don't know if you know this. The government of Britain pays every single school in Britain, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, secular, to send 2 pupils and a teacher to Auschwitz to see for themselves. It's paid for by the government. It's an extraordinary thing. And Europe really tried. I was present at Stockholm on the 27th of January 2000 when every single leader of every European country came together to pledge themselves to renewed efforts never to forget the Holocaust and never to allow anti-Semitism. So it wasn't for lack of trying, but it has emerged, it has re-emerged. What is new about the new anti-Semitism? 3 things. Number 1, why are Jews hated? As I said, in the Middle Ages, they were hated because of their religion. In the 19th century, they were hated because of their race. Today, they are hated because of their nation state. That is the new anti-Semitism. The new anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism, but with the added implication that all Jews are Zionist and hence legitimate targets. It is an astonishing phenomenon that a nation brought into existence by United Nations vote on the 29th of November 1947 should be, still to this day, 66 years on, denied the legitimacy of its very existence. That is the first difference. Second, obviously, the epicenter has changed. Anti-Semitism used to be centered in Europe. Today it is centered in the Middle East. It used to be produced by Christian cultures. Today it is produced by Muslim cultures. And that is the second thing that makes it different. The third thing, however, that makes it different, I have to explain to you. Believe it or not, it is very hard in public to invite people to hate. It's not the kind of thing people do. And therefore, anti-Semitism, which is inviting people to hate, has to be vindicated by the highest source of authority in a culture at any given moment. In the Middle Ages, what was the highest source of authority? It was religion. So it became religious anti-Semitism. In the 19th century in Europe, what was the highest source of authority? The answer is science. And that is what made the new anti-Semitism. 2 so-called sciences, believed to be scientific at the time. Number 1, the so-called scientific study of race, a curious mix of anthropology and biology, that the human race is endemically divided into different races, the Aryan race at the top, the Semitic at the bottom, and absolute nonsense as we now know from DNA, and the pseudoscience called social Darwinism. That is, that the same rules that apply in biology apply to societies, that the strong survive by eliminating the weak. And these 2 things put forward in all leading universities in Germany, that was the pristine supreme source of authority. Today, since the Holocaust actually, what is the supreme source of authority? It's no longer science, because after Hiroshima, people realized that science gave us the ability to destroy life on Earth. After the Holocaust, the supreme authority became human rights. And that is why the new anti-Semitism is always constructed in terms of human rights. 1 week before 9/11, at the notorious United Nations International Conference Against Racism in Durban, which became the launch pad for this new form of racism, accused Israel of the 5 cardinal sins against human rights: racism, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, attempted genocide, and crimes against humanity. So that is the third distinctive thing that has happened. What is really terrible, really terrible, and it is happening throughout the Middle East, is the question, what did they do with the Holocaust? How can you be an anti-Semite after the Holocaust? And today, 4 beliefs are being circulated in the Middle East. Some people believe one, some another, some believe all four at the same time. That is the Iranian version. It never happened. It was invented by Jews because they wanted some real estate in the Middle East. Number two, it half happened, and the trouble was that Hitler didn't finish the job. Number three, it really happened, but they deserved it. And number four, it did really happen, but today the new Nazis are the Jews, and the Palestinians have become the new Jews. Now, this is how a horrendous series of new lies, new myths, and new libels are being spread upon. However, that is how things stood in 2010. And I want to tell you how things stand now, because the situation has changed in very, very important ways. Number one was the so-called Arab Spring, which, as you know, has led, and we see it daily in our newspapers and on our television screens, to almost complete meltdown in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Libya, in Somalia, in Yemen, Egypt fighting its own battle, and I salute Egypt's president, al-Sisi, who has been one of the heroes here. And then you get neutral countries like Lebanon and Jordan that may, God forbid, become destabilized. Now, what all of this has made clear is the issue never was Jews. It never was Israel. They're not fighting in Syria and Iraq because of Israel. It never was about us. It never was about Israel. It's become clear that the real issue is an internal battle within the Arab world and within Islam itself, between Sunni and Shia, between moderate and extremist, between the traditionalist Islam, pretty tolerant kind of Islam, and the Wahhabi Salafist version of Islam that has been spread throughout the Middle East through Arab oil petrodollars. The real issue is, does Islam make space or not for democracy? Does it make space for the rule of law? Does it make space for the Article 18 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which guarantees freedom of religion in any country? And of course it doesn't exist in most of the Middle East. So this has brought home to the world, or at least those who think, the sudden realization that the charge for 50 years is that it is all Israel's fault is simply untrue. That's number one. Number two, Jews are actually not the only, they're not even the primary victim. Oddly enough, the real victims today are either Muslims at the hands of other Muslims, or even more consequentially, Christians. Christians actually are being eliminated from the Middle East. It is extraordinary. I mean, they've almost all have fled Syria. Iraq, which 10 years ago had 1.5 million Christians, is down below 400,000. Mosul, where there's been a Christian presence for longer than almost anywhere else, there are no Christians at all. They were all either crucified, beheaded, or murdered or forced out in other ways. In Afghanistan, there are no Christians whatsoever. They burnt the last church down to the ground in 2010. In Egypt, 5 million Copts are living in fear. And in Gaza, I don't know if you know this, in Gaza, when churches criticize Israel, I get quite upset. Because the only place in the Middle East where it is safe to be a Christian is Israel. And in Gaza, the last Christian bookseller in 2007 was told by Hamas, close your bookshop. He didn't. They burnt it to the ground. Then they slit his throat. This is real ethnic cleansing. And who is saying it? This is, I have to say, the unacknowledged crime of our time. But thirdly, what became clear in Paris just now is that the threat is not only to Jews. The threat today is the whole of Europe. Today, if you try and exercise freedom of speech on Islam, then you see what happened to Salman Rushdie, who published 25 years ago, the Satanic Verses. They killed his Italian translator. They killed his Japanese translator. When they had a cocktail reception for the launch of the book in Turkey, they burnt down the hotel, killing 35 guests at that book launch. When the Danish cartoons were published, over 200 people were killed in worldwide protests. When the Pope, Benedict XVI, gave a lecture in Regensburg in 2006, which included one sentence of a quotation from a 14th century Christian theologian who was mildly critical of Islam, Christians were killed throughout Africa. What happened to freedom of speech for which Europe fought for 400 years? This is no longer just about us. It is about Western freedom itself. And these are really, really important developments. And I will explain why in a moment. But now I want to do one more thing, which is to explain how is it that people do these crazy things? You know, how is it that they believe in the bloodline? Which today, of course, is circulated all through the Middle East. I'm sure you know this. In 1983, the Syrian Defense Minister, Mustafa Tlass, published a book called The Matzah of Zion, which is the bloodline imported into the Middle East. It has been translated into English, gone through 8 editions. In 1991, the Syrian representative of the United Nations Commission for Human Rights recommended that all the members of the UN read this book so that they will learn the true nature of Zionist racism. It's still there. And they still believe in the protocols of the Elders of Zion. I think whoever invented the protocols of the Elders of Zion has the best sense of humor I ever came across. According to the protocols of the Elders of Zion, Jews control the banks, Jews control the economy, Jews control the media. Little do they know we can't even control a shul board meeting. How is it that people believe these crazy things? And this is what I want to tell you, because I didn't have a chance to do it in my Wall Street Journal article, and I want to explain this to you. It is very, very interesting. And I'm not going to enter into what your president said about the killings in Paris. But I do want you to understand how strange this is. Don't forget they killed the editor and 5 cartoonists of Charlie Hebdo because they made fun of Islam. They killed a policewoman who was trying to capture them. As I said in the Wall Street Journal, they killed them because of what they did. They killed the 4 Jews in the supermarket because of what they are. Now, why do you do something like this? That Mumbai attack in 2008, very highly focused on cafes, on hotels, and yet they schlepped out to some little back street because they knew there was a Chabad house there, and they murdered the young rabbi and his 6-month pregnant wife. Why do they do this? And I really want to explain this to you. The 2 people who wrote most insightfully about the relationship between religion and violence were Sigmund Freud and a French literary theorist and anthropologist called René Girard. Have you heard of René Girard? He's not well known, but he should be, because he was a sort of Freudian, influenced by Freud. And what he has to say is very interesting. And here it is, this book he wrote called Violence and the Sacred, published in 1972. Very important book. What he said is that it isn't that religion creates violence. It is that violence creates religion. It's a very interesting idea. And here is his explanation. And Freud, of course, wrote about this similarly in 3 books, Totem and Taboo, Future of an Illusion, and Moses and Monotheism. Here it goes. Here's Girard's theory. In a society without the rule of law, you can get violence. You do get violence. What happens when there's violence? What happens when somebody kills a member of your family? In a society without law and without courts, what do? You take revenge. You kill a member of their family. And that happens in all primitive societies, all societies without the rule of law. And you get a blood feud, a cycle of revenge and retaliation, which has no natural end. And it can destroy entire societies. It practically destroyed Europe in the 16th and 17th century. It seems, and of course it's a basic theme of literature. Romeo and Juliet, the Montagues and the Capulets. West Side Story, if anyone can remember that far back. The Jets and the Sharks. Am I on safer ground with the Godfather, the Corleones and the Titanos? That's what it is. Now, this can go on forever. How do you stop the cycle of violence? And this is Girard's theory. The only way to stop the cycle of violence is to kill somebody who is neither a Montague nor a Capulet. Are you with me? You kill somebody who's an outsider. So a revenge killing has happened, but because it's an outsider, there's no risk of reprisal. And that is the only way you stop the cycle of violence. And that is how religion is born, according to Girard. Religion, the first religious act is sacrifice. And it's a human sacrifice. The first sacrifice is a scapegoat. Somebody who dies because of somebody else's sin. And that is, according to Girard, the function of religion. To deflect away violence that would destroy a society, and you deflect it away by projecting it onto somebody outside that society. Do you follow? It's a very clever and profound theory. Obviously it doesn't happen, Baruch Hashem, in Atlanta because you've got law. But in places like Syria, in places without rule of law, where there are blood feuds, that's the function of religion. If religion weren't there, the society would destroy itself. Religion is there because it deflects violence onto the scapegoat. Girard says very simply, the scapegoat has to have two characteristics, or three characteristics. Number one, it must be sufficiently like the Montagues and the Capulets. I mean, you couldn't kill a Martian and say, well, that's, it's got to be enough like a Montague or a Capulet to be a reasonable substitute. Number two, it can't actually be a Montague or a Capulet because you haven't ended the cycle of violence. And number three, the victim has to be a member of a group that is in no position to retaliate. And now you'll understand why the Jews. That has been our role for 1,000 years. Jews are like Christians and Muslims. Same Abrahamic monotheism. But we're not Christians or Muslims. And for 2,000 years, before we had a state of Israel, we couldn't retaliate. And that is when anti-Semitism appears. We can actually tell you when it is going to appear. If you had asked in 1890, what was the world center of anti-Semitism, what would you have said? In 1890. Either Paris or Vienna. Germany wouldn't have come into it. So why did it suddenly break out, the Holocaust, in Germany? Islam never had a blood libel. It never had the protocols of the Oghuz of Zion. It took one from Christianity. It took the other from members of the Tsarist Russian secret police. It never had these others. So why did anti-Semitism suddenly appear in Islam? The answer is Anti-Semitism appears when a society is going through such a breakdown, such an internal crisis, that if they didn't kill Jews, they'd kill one another. And that is what happened in Germany after that complex of issues. They're defeating World War I, the punitive terms of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, the hyperinflation of the 1920s, German society torn apart like a schmatter, and only Hitler and hate can unite them. Only if you can project all that internal hate onto an external object, that's when you use anti-Semitism. That is, of course, what is happening to Islam today, and it's being played out all over the world of Islam. It is tearing itself to pieces. Now you begin to understand why it is that Islam, after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in 1922, it was like Germany's defeating World War I, and the societies were divided. Would you write this new thing, secular nationalism, Nasser in Egypt, Assad in Syria, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, or do you try religion? These societies would have torn themselves apart if a tyrant hadn't blamed the Jews for everything. The second there was no longer a tyrant to blame the Jews, they did tear themselves. And that is, I'm afraid, why anti-Semitism happens, and that is why people commit violence in the name of God. According to Girard, that is the origin of religion itself. So, we have to understand, and the world has to understand, that anti-Semitism is not caused by Jews. Anti-Semitism kills Jews. We are the victims of anti-Semitism, but we are not the cause of anti-Semitism. The cause is internal conflict within the society itself. And if the society can't face its own problems fairly and squarely, you can kill. I tell you, listen, when they stopped killing the Jews in Europe, they started killing witches. They killed 40,000 witches. Do you think that made the crops grow any better, or somebody's toothache to go away? If you blame a scapegoat, you're blaming something that wasn't the cause of the problem. So every time you kill another witch, you don't get 1 millimeter closer to a solution of the problem. It is avoiding the problem, it is not addressing the problem. And we have to say that this is not on. Not only is it bad for us, it's bad for Muslims, it's bad for the Middle East, it's bad for Christians, it's bad for Europe, and it is bad for the world. Friends, I have to say that we have to do the following things. Number one, we have to state this loudly and clearly. And believe you me, I will do what I have to do so. And I've just finished a book in which I'm going to say so very loudly and clearly. And we have to tell the world. This has got nothing to do with Jews. It's got nothing to do with Israel. It has got to do with our being made a scapegoat, because for 2,000 years we were the most convenient thing on the horizon that could serve as a scapegoat. And we have to therefore say to the world, we cannot cure anti-Semitism alone. The victim cannot cure the crime. The hated cannot cure the hate. I will stand and fight, as I have done in the press, in the television, in the House of Lords, for the right of Christians anywhere in the world to live their faith without fear. But I need Christians to stand up for the right of Jews anywhere in the world to live their faith without fear. Praise God, our Jewish community, especially the Jewish students, already beginning in 2002, to lead the fight against Islamophobia. But I need Muslims to lead the fight against Judeophobia. Friends, we cannot do this alone. And we have to show everyone how they are all implicated. Number two, why really and truly were Jews hated? The answer is given by our first anti-Semite, Haman. We're going to read it in the Megillah on Purim. What does he say? Yeshno am echad mefuzam forad ben amim v'datehem shonot mikolam. There's one people whose laws are different from anyone else's. We were hated because we were different. Anti-Semitism is the classic instance of dislike of the unlike. But the truth is we're all different. Being different is what makes us human. The fact that each one of us is different from every other one of us is what makes us unique, irreplaceable, unsubstitutable. Therefore, life is holy. Therefore, a single life is like a universe. A society that has no room for Jews has no room for humanity. We have to say that loud and clear. And finally, we must not allow ourselves to be intimidated. There is one fundamental difference between now and 1933. Difference that we should thank Hashem for every single day. We have Medinat Israel. We have this state of Israel. At long last, we have a home in the Robert Frost sense of the word. He defined home as the place where, when you have to go there, they have to let you in. Because of that, every Jew in the world walks tall and walks safe. And therefore, we will not be intimidated. We will stand and we will fight. And we will refuse to be afraid. If you want to know the simplest answer to anti-Semitism, ask the 5-year-old kids in your school, and they will give you the best answer. They learn it as a song. They sing it to you every Shabbos. Kol ha'olam kulo geshet tzama'od va'ayika shelo lefachad klam. It isn't easy to be a Jew. It isn't easy to be alive. Life is a very narrow bridge. But the main thing is, never be afraid. Friends, I end, therefore, with a story which has absolutely nothing to do with anti-Semitism, nothing to do with violence. But I love this story. It happened just before I was born. And do you know, during Elul and through most of Tishrei, we say a special psalm. Psalm 27, you know the psalm. LeDavid Hashem Ori V'Yishi. Well, I don't know if you know this. The question is, do you say LeDavid Hashem Ori V'Yishi on Shmini Atzeret? The short answer is, some do, some don't. In Eastern Europe, they used to say it. In Central Europe, they didn't say it. And of course, all our shuls in England had a mix of East European Jews and Central European Jews. The Singer's Prayer Book, the official prayer book of the United Synagogue at the time, this is the 46, 47, had the rubric, this psalm is to be said till Shmini Atzeret, leaving it entirely ambiguous as to whether till means up to and including, or up to, but not including. We don't have the word that you have, which is through, yeah? Which means up to and including, if I'm not mistaken. We don't have in English. I know English is inferior to the real thing, which is American English. But we don't know. So nobody knew. So every single year, there'd always be a row. Do you say, don't you say? The Siddur didn't tell you one way or another. And one year, the Chazan, in a very big shul in North London, it's a true story, it's recorded in the law court, he gets up and starts saying, LeDavid Hashem Ori V'Yishi on Shmini Atzeret. The Gabbai says, shut. The Chazan keeps stopping him. The Gabbai says, I'm the Gabbai. The Chazan says, I'm the Chazan. The Gabbai says, you don't say it on Shmini Atzeret. The Chazan says, you do say it on Shmini Atzeret. And he keeps stopping him. And the Gabbai gets up and he says, you're fired. He sacks him on the spot. The Chazan takes the case to court on grounds of unfair dismissal. The court comes before an English, non-Jewish judge who has to decide, was the Chazan fairly dismissed or unfairly dismissed. Which turns on the question, do you or don't you say, this Gentile judge has to paskin on something that even the official synod didn't paskin on. Chacham einav barosha. The judge had the wisdom of song. He had the song read out in English in the court. And he then said, I think that song is so beautiful that you ought to say it every day. The Chazan got his job back and peace was restored. Why do I tell you this story? Just remember the opening line of that song. LeDavid, Hashem, Ori v'yishi mimi ira. If God is my light and my salvation, whom then shall I fear? Hashem ma'oz chayai mimi avcha. God is the refuge of my life. Of whom then shall I be scared? We will stand up and not be afraid. We will fight the good fight against anti-Semitism, not only in the name of the Jewish people, but in the name of decent Muslims, in the name of endangered Christians, in the name of Western freedom, and we will fight and we will win, because God is with us and we will never, ever be afraid. Thank you very much.